Okay, so let's talk about these gaps in Medicare. So again, we're talking about original Medicare. So if I were to just have Part A, my hospital, and Part B, which is my medical services, that leaves us open for what I like to call the big 6 gaps. And so what you'll notice here, I know this slide is a lot, and I'm going to actually simplify this in the next slide, but just as a general understanding here, if we look at these different gaps here, our first gap is our inpatient hospital stay. And in 2024, the deductible is $1,632. So that means if I go into the hospital, I'm spending $1,632. So as a reminder, a deductible is an amount that needs to be met before our insurance comes in and helps us at all, right? So if we go into the hospital, we are immediately paying $1,632 before our insurance kicks in at all. Okay? And that's per benefit period. So a benefit period is going to be if you go into the hospital and you're then discharged. If you go back to the hospital within 60 days, you're still in what we call that benefit period. So if you go back into the hospital, you don't have to pay that deductible again because you're still within that 60-day period. But if you go outside of that, so let's say you're discharged from the hospital and you go back 6 months later, you're paying that deductible again. So you theoretically could be paying this deductible multiple times each year. So that's a really big gap. That's one of the biggest ones. So after our deductible is met, let's say we're in the hospital and our deductible is met, we have a co-insurance then. So if we're there days 1 to 60, we don't pay anything while we're there for those 60 days. But if we go beyond that, then we're starting to pay a co-insurance each day, or copay each day, of $408 for days 61 to 90. Now, if we go beyond day 90, we're now into our 60 lifetime reserve days. We have 60 of those in a lifetime. If we start digging into those, we're looking at $816 per day if we go and have a hospital stay beyond that 90 days. Now, I should note that most beneficiaries are not in the hospital that long, thankfully, but it is something to keep in mind. And then we get to skilled nursing. And skilled nursing, again, would be like if you had to go into maybe Encompass Rehab, for example, because you needed some skilled care. Once we get in there, we have days 1 to 20. We don't pay anything for those first days. But if we go beyond that, we're then paying a per day $204. Okay, so you can start to see how these numbers could rack up if you end up in the hospital or in a skilled nursing facility. So those are sort of the gaps on our Part A, our hospital side or our inpatient side. And then we come down to Part B, our medical side. And on Part B, we have a deductible. And so for 2024, that deductible is $240. So on our medical side, we have to meet that $240 deductible. And then after we meet that, generally, as a general rule of thumb, we're paying 20% of all of our bills. So think about if you went in and you had, again, some sort of surgery and you only had original Medicare Part A and Part B, you're going to be responsible for 20% of that cost. Now, excess charges, this is an interesting one. I name it as one of the gaps, but basically what this is that a physician could charge you up to 15% more than the Medicare reimbursement, the Medicare allowable. Now in Pennsylvania, these don't exist. There are not excess charges. They are not allowed in Pennsylvania. But if you were to go and receive care outside of Pennsylvania, theoretically a physician could charge you excess charges if they wanted to. So if you had to go to a specialty hospital or a specialty clinic, for example, a physician may charge you up to 15% more. So this is a nice simple way to look at this. So we have our Part A side, which we talked about, and then we have our Part B side, which we talked about. So on the hospital side, again, we have that deductible, and you can potentially have this deductible more than once throughout the year. And then we have our per day copayment of days 61 to 90, 408, and then again, 60 lifetime reserve days. We get 60 in our lifetime, but if we're digging into those, $816 a day. And then we have our skilled nursing. And then if we get onto the medical Part B side, we have our $240 deductible, our 20% co-insurance for all of our medical services, and then potentially excess charges. So these are some really big gaps. And what we need to figure out is once we go on Medicare and we get Part A and Part B, how are we going to reduce that liability? Because we certainly don't want to be liable for all of these big gaps, right? And so we'll talk about that as we keep going. Let's look at a quick little example of this. Mr. Jones is hospitalized. He's admitted for a 5-day stay and is released with no complications or further treatment. 3 months later, he is readmitted to the hospital for a separate issue. He has a 3-day stay followed by 30 days in a skilled nursing facility. Then he is released. He receives some other outpatient services and meets his Part B deductible. Then he sees a specialist. So Mr. Jones only has original Medicare. He only has Part A and Part B. So let's see how that affected him. So his first stay, he paid $1,632. Okay, so he met that deductible. But then unfortunately, he went back in, I think it was what, three months later? He has to pay that deductible again. Okay, he's in a new benefit period. So those first 20 days in the skilled nursing facility, we didn't pay anything for those, but he was there for 30 days. So we're looking at $2,040 in the skilled nursing facility. He met his Part B deductible, and then he went and saw a specialist. And so remember, 20% of all of your medical services right now, if you only have original Medicare, so he is now out another $60 for his specialist visit. So you can see if you only have original Medicare and you don't have some way to cover those gaps, how you can end up with some really large bills. So in this case, Mr. Jones has $5,604 out of pocket.